Welcome to APG Pathshala. The module that we are going to discuss today is later Wittgenstein and religious belief in the paper Philosophy of Religion. This paper is written by Vibha Chaturvedi, who was formerly at University of Delhi. I am Raghurama Raju from University of Hyderabad. One way to begin discussing this important module is to locate Wittgenstein in the 20th century philosophy. Now, prior to Wittgenstein or during his time, there are two important aspects that surrounded philosophy. One was an attempt by philosophers to make philosophy scientific, to bring it nearer to science. The other one, as part of this, was by this school of philosophy called logical positivist, who are trying to remove or exclude through verification anything that is not have reference. So they came up with this cleaning language which has several elements, several words which do not have reference. So they had words like God, soul, spirit and things like that. So they were trying to see that all these things are eliminated. Elimination of metaphysics was one of the important tasks of philosophy before Wittgenstein. And this was undertaken by people who proposed what they call as artificial language, by those like Rudolf Carnap, Maurice Schlick, and then the works of Frege, Sense and Reference are all part of this background. So they were trying to do this work, and it is against this background Wittgenstein makes his appearance. Wittgenstein comes and finds himself as part of the scientific oriented philosophers in his early phase, and then he moves away from his early stand where he was in association with the logical positivists and people like Carnap, who belong to the Vienna circle, and then asks some questions which are very radical. He asked this question, namely, isn't this effort of the philosophers taking philosophy nearer to objectivism, nearer to science, takes philosophy away from ordinary life? That's a very important issue which Wittgenstein argued should concern philosophy as a subject. Okay? So in terms of technicalities, it is that while refining the meaning of language, words that have meaning, when trying to calibrate words with reference, with objects, are we not making philosophy reductionistic? Isn't this reductionism takes philosophy away from ordinary life? And if this is what is happening, he says that it has serious implications. One of the reasons which comes in this context is that it goes away from ordinary individual life. And the question that comes to us immediately is that the reason why we fought against religion in the earlier time was to bring philosophy nearer to human being. Now, if you go after science, there is a tendency to take again in a different way philosophy away from the ordinary life. That is the point that Wittgenstein seems to be making. So he is saying that we have to save philosophy from the clutches of the experts, from the technicalities, from this obsession to make more and more things clear by asking, is there a logical structure to ordinary language, and find that there is no logical structure and it has several things that does not have reference. So it is this that has bothered Wittgenstein. It is against this context he comes up with a very important statement, namely, what is the purpose of language? Okay, are logical positivists or people from Vienna circle asking right questions when they find that logical ordinary language does not have a logical structure? So what is the purpose of language? And Wittgenstein finds the purpose of language is communication in various ways of uses, and he says that this is very important. And if the crux of language is communication, the question that we have to ask is it communicating? Is it serving this purpose? If it is serving the purpose, then you should find out how it is being used. So he asked this thing, don't ask for meaning, ask for its use. This is the crux of the ordinary and public language as public that is proposed by Wittgenstein. So Wittgenstein, in saying that language is public and then attacking the earlier tasks of philosophy, namely looking for logical structure of ordinary language and not finding it, seems to have democratized philosophy and saved it from going away from the ordinary life. So there is this larger civilizational aspect that underlies Wittgenstein's intervention. This seems to be the reason why many people flocked around him, rallied around him, and not only made use of his works, extended it to the domains not only within philosophy, like philosophy of science. You have, for instance, Popper, who was interested in looking at what is the logic in the discovery of sciences, to the Thomas Kuhn's attempt to look at the paradigmatic nature of science, to the domains where Wittgenstein's philosophy was used in social sciences and other disciplines. So that is the important point, and made a U-turn and saved, as I said, philosophy from relapsing into technicalities and removed from reality. So it is against this background, let us look at let's look at what Wittgenstein has to say on the religious beliefs. As I already mentioned, that Wittgenstein's views on religious beliefs have to be seen against the background of the earlier efforts to eliminate metaphysics and religion. Okay? In Wittgenstein, you don't find in one place his discussion about religious belief. So there is a need to construct his views on religious belief from his writings, which are scattered all over. The notable writings where you find his views on religious belief are the notebooks and philosophical investigations. He clarifies in these places that what is the nature of religious discourse, and he draws largely examples from Judeo-Christian tradition. Though the examples that he draws are from Judeo-Christian traditions, we can extend them to other religious traditions. So the point that Wittgenstein is asking is that you should ask, what are the implications of the issues of meaning in language? What is the implication if you accept certain religious beliefs? If you accept only analytical and synthetic statements, religious beliefs are neither analytical nor synthetic. So then they get outside the purview of language. So there is asking the question that what are we doing? Is our job to clean language or to study and understand the use of language? So that's why he says that what is important for a philosopher is to understand various uses of language and also what is the function of language. It is in this context he makes his first comment, first point, where I think he's saying that there is a difference between factual language and religious language. Religious language is different from the factual language. Within a religious discourse, there are different uses of language, there are different meanings of religious term, and this is the one task that we have to keep in mind. The other important thing that he talks about religious beliefs is what is the impact of a religious belief on a believer. That's the important thing. The third one is that how does this impact his attitude to life. How is religious thinking of religious belief impacts the life of a believer. So to take the first point for discussion, that religious beliefs for Wittgenstein are not grounded on proofs and arguments. He says that there is no need to give arguments in support of your belief. There is no need to provide proofs for religious beliefs or experiences. So belief does not rest on evidence in the same way as scientific facts rests on evidence. To quote, he says, whatever believing in God may be, it cannot be believing in something we can test or find meaning of testing. So he makes a distinction between belief and knowledge. So the second point that he makes is evidence for the belief is different. There can be ordinary evidence. Further, to quote him, he says that the point is that if there were evidence, that would in fact destroy the whole business. So there is a distinct uses of belief, and there may not be evidence for the religious belief. For him, there is this extraordinary use of the word belief. One talks of believing, and at the same time, one does not use belief. So one talks about believing, one believes, but one doesn't use the word believe to designate that. So here it is used, he says, entirely differently. On the other hand, it is not used as we generally use the word know. Okay, this is what he says. So there is a meaning is different in different language games, and language is a form of life. Following from this, Wittgenstein is rejecting all those people who try to give justification or who provide evidence to the religious beliefs. These include religious apologists, even philosophers or theologians who sought to give evidence to the religious beliefs such as God, rebirth, and etc. They include, for instance, Richard Swinburne, who tried to give probabilistic argument for the existence of God, John Hick and Himberg, who gave the verifiability of religious experience as possible evidence for religious beliefs. He would also reject believers who try to give evidence for religious beliefs. According to him, giving evidence is irrelevant and superfluous. He says that religion, in trying to give evidence to religious beliefs, is not doing a proper thing. He says that evidence can be given for scientific statements. Now, if you try to give evidence to those domains where evidence cannot be given, it could amount to trespassing by evidence into the domains where it cannot enter. So, for him, religious belief is not an opinion. He would not say that since religious belief cannot be given evidence, it doesn't mean that it is an opinion, a mere opinion. So we should not give importance to it. No, you cannot just dismiss religious belief. Religious beliefs are important and they are not mere opinion. Religious opinions, Wittgenstein goes on to say, cannot be falsified. That you cannot come up with a counter evidence and say that, oh, you said that something and I give you evidence to prove that you are wrong, and then you can reject that religious belief. He says that religious beliefs cannot be falsified. Religious beliefs for him are firm and unshakable. Though not established, the believer is prepared to risk his life. Even though they are inconclusive, they lack evidence, they are overwhelmingly counterproductive evidence that is available, it still helps a believer to be firm about what he believes. So, religious beliefs for Wittgenstein are not unreasonable. And then let's look at what he says about the relation between a believer and a non-believer. According to Wittgenstein, non-believer does not contradict a believer. You know why? Because there is no common denominator between a believer and a non-believer. If there is no common denominator, it makes the relation between believer and non-believer incommensurable. Okay, commensurability or disagreements are possible about factual matters. Religious beliefs belong to different plane altogether, and believer and non-believer think differently. So you cannot say that non-believer contradicts the believer. Since Wittgenstein makes evidence irrelevant of religious belief and kept those who provide evidence, including the believer, outside the realm of belief, he also kept, this is something which is very radical in Wittgenstein, he also kept religious authority outside the domain of religious faith and belief. He said that some people can believe even without believing in scriptures or religious institutions. That is, doctrine along with evidence are not important for a religious believer. Belief is immediate and passionate, and evaluation of religious belief is irrelevant. Thus, both scriptures and religious institutions are contingent with religious belief. There is a contingent relation between religious belief and belief in or acceptance of scriptures or religious institutions. A believer, says Wittgenstein, can believe without believing in any scriptures. A believer seeks certainty in his faith. It is partly, that is, this seeking certainty is partly psychological and partly moral. And reason or evidence plays no role in this faith. So, while this is true, but a believer, according to Wittgenstein, sees different connections between one aspect in religion and another aspect in religion. So this is the one important point that you find in Wittgenstein. The second important aspect that you find in Wittgenstein is, instead of talking about giving evidence to religious belief, he emphasizes the importance of consequences of belief. And what does belief do to the life of the believer? What are the implications of religious belief on the life of a religious believer? That's an important aspect that concerns Wittgenstein. So this is the overall picture of religious beliefs according to Wittgenstein. Let us now take some criticisms on religious beliefs according to Wittgenstein, and they are, for instance, there is this criticism where it is argued that while evidence is irrelevant, is it totally irrelevant? Okay? Isn't it possible for us to think about different kinds of evidences? Okay? Can we not give evidence which is not similar to that of evidence in science? Okay. Now, the other point that comes as in relation to this is, Wittgenstein is rejecting the totalizing tendency that was prevalent during his time in giving evidence to everything, including religion. In rejecting this totalizing tendency that was prevalent during his time, is he not also totalizing the irrelevance of the evidence with regard to religious belief? Okay, so there can be difference between evidence and no evidence. There can be difference between different evidences and no evidence. Okay, isn't it possible to give different evidence rather than what he seems to be suggesting, that no evidence is possible or required about religious beliefs? For instance, maybe he would say that he is not rejecting evidence per se. One can give evidence about factual domains. What is important is, in religion, you may not be able to give evidence, or it is not necessary to give religious evidence to religious beliefs. So the second point of criticism is, if you say that religious beliefs cannot be given or do not need to be given evidence, isn't this leads us to the situation where it is not possible for us to distinguish a wrong belief from a right belief? Like somebody who is mentally ill might say that somebody is all the time harassing him when he is not harassing him. So one might say that that is an illusion, that is not true. Isn't it possible to distinguish a right belief from a wrong belief? And there are no provisions in Wittgenstein to make this, because he doesn't allow evidence on reason to enter into the domain of religion. The third criticism that we have against Wittgenstein is, while it is true that there is a contingent relation between scriptures and religious institutions and religious belief, isn't it the case historically that there is some relation between scriptures and belief? Many people believe both in scriptures and have belief. Isn't that the case? And then there is no clear-cut answer to this criticism in Wittgenstein. The fourth criticism on him is that there is a difference between belief and non-belief to two different beliefs. For instance, one can say that X believes, Y do not believe. Now, there can be Z who is also a believer but not believer in what X believes. And so there are two different kinds of beliefs. X who is a believer, Y who is a non-believer, Z who is a believer but different from the belief of the X. There is a possibility that the reasons by Y and the reasons by Z against X may be same. So it is in this context that there is a possibility where a non-believer can align with another believer against another third kind of a believer. So this is a possibility, and we should take it up for larger discussion. The fifth criticism on is that if religion faith is equally valid, and is it beyond criticism and scrutiny? Like if you say that religion is outside the bounds of evidence and rationality, is there a possibility where we can criticize religion? Is religion outside the domain of criticism? Is it outside the domain of scrutiny? And the next point is that are religious languages capable of cognitive scrutiny? This is the one important point that is leveled against Wittgenstein's defense of religious beliefs. Now Wittgenstein might take up these things one by one, but one point that can be extended by extending Wittgenstein's point of view is that I think he is saying that misuse of religion cannot be the reason for abandoning religion. There was a religion and religious institutions have come later, and then there is the misuse of religion. So there is this thing. Now the misuse of the religion, which comes at the third stage, cannot invalidate religious beliefs, which are even prior to the institutionalizing of that religion. For instance, take this example, to use Ashish Nandi's example for a different purpose here. If there are road accidents and people get killed, do we abandon transport system? Okay, that's the point that I think he seems to be making. with regard to those like logical positivist or the Vienna Circle, who were trying to eliminate religion, because there is this misuse or they do not have these kinds of things. So that is the reason why we need to look at Wittgenstein in a more complex way and look at his passages more carefully before we come to conclusions about criticizing him. Thank you.